and welcome to Senior Living Marketing Perspectives. I'm Debbie Howard from Senior Living Smart. And today I am thrilled to talk to Amy McKinley. She is the co-founder of Senior Source Consulting. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, we're exciting to talk about all things kind of sales and marketing related. Obviously, you are more on the sales kind of consulting training,
Mhm.
side to optimize sales and conversions. And, we spend a lot of our time on the marketing side, lead generation, to hand you the right leads at the right time
Right.
so that they are sales ready and have qualified for the time of the salesperson. So, I think it's as we're coming out of COVID, we're recording this early in March, and a lot of our clients are hoping there's a pent up demand and that,
Sure.
sales is going to start coming back. Our move-ins are going to start returning. And we're beginning to see a little bit of the leading edge of lead generation
Mhm.
coming back. But we're having a little bit of lag, on the conversion side, which I think is normal. Kind of, we're
Mhm.
in this vaccine kind of place, and that's been, a focus. And so
Right.
before we kind of jump into all things sales and marketing, I would just love for you to tell us, Amy, a little bit about, your background and about Senior Source Consulting, in case there are people listening that are not familiar. And I feel like our backgrounds are so similar.
I know. Well, I myself have been in the industry serving seniors for, it's hard to believe, almost 35 years. And
Mhm.
we started Senior Source Consulting Group in December of 2016. My partner is Libby Lauer. She's in Tampa, Florida. And Libby and I worked together, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
At a big CCRC entry fee community in South Tampa. And we just always worked really well together. And so when I wanted to, kind of start this business, she was the first person I reached out to. And it's just been great working together and serving an industry that we both love. She has 30 years plus experience as well. So I think we bring a lot to the table for our clients. And, we're excited to be here. Senior Source, when we were first kind of thinking about how we could serve the industry, what we could bring to the table, I don't think that we necessarily thought that mystery shopping was the way that it would go. But that was a need of our first client, and we just kind of developed, I think, a very unique approach to mystery shopping. And then from spending all that time in communities and with sales teams, we did kind of saw where some of the gaps in performance were, or some of the different ways that we could serve the industry. So then we kind of moved into sales training and coaching, and then into the executive search world, knowing that it's hard to find those people. And because we had worked in the industry so long, for the positions that we were searching for, we had either held those positions, hired and trained and managed those positions, or worked alongside those positions. So we kind of, got what was important in terms of the qualities of a person taking on a particular position in the industry. So it just seemed to make sense for us to kind of head that direction as well. So.
Yeah, well, you're definitely tied into the two biggest pain points in the industry right now, which is occupancy recovery and staffing. So,
Right.
so it's
Yeah.
yay! I tell you, it's a good thing you listen to the market when they kind of went, "We're over here. We need this."
Right.
No, that's great. So let's dive into sales.
Mm-hmm.
COVID has certainly rocked the world of our salespeople. I mean, basically, we took all their favorite toys away, right? So all of a sudden, you had to sell your community in this no-touch environment. And, you can't have events, and you can't do tours, and you can't have luncheons, and you can't have them come meet the team and experience that. And I would say a year ago, we would have told everybody, you can't close somebody who you cannot get through the door.
Right.
And everything about marketing was, how do we drive more people through the door to have those face-to-face human interactions? Because what we sell is so human, right?
Sure.
So maybe give us, from your perspective, how the industry pivoted, maybe a little sense of, what's worked, because the sales teams really had to adapt
Mhm.
new technology. They had to get comfortable in whole new ways. They probably had to create a follow-up differently since they couldn't do home visits and a lot of the things that, that they were so used to doing. So how do you sell to somebody that you cannot be face-to-face with? Maybe we'll start there and figure out like what we've learned and what we did well and maybe what we're still working on.
Sure, sure. Well, you are absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head in terms of what salespeople are sort of up against right now. I mean, they've had to become the experts on, filming tours versus giving a tour, and always calls as inquiry calls are important, but even now, I mean, they have to be more on point, and I think that's what we're seeing. And with the mystery shopping that we're doing, it's kind of interesting because we always want to sort of set the stage that okay, we're doing a shop, but it's a one-time experience. Don't be too hard on the salesperson because it's just one time. You never know what could be happening. But in this case, in this world right now, more than ever, the phone call has to be on point. So obviously, we had been doing a lot of in-person mystery shopping. We shifted to a lot of telephone shopping. And so what we're seeing now is just this real need to handle that inquiry call. It seems so basic, but it really truly is the most important thing that a salesperson could be doing or a community could be doing. So when I say on point, I mean, answer the call in a friendly voice. Make sure that there's someone available to handle that inquiry. Make sure that the salesperson is available and not distracted with things like vaccination clinics and meetings. Yes. And so we're hearing a ton of getting a ton of feedback that, we called the salesperson 3-4 times and, 3 out of the 4 times they were in a meeting or they were out of the building or, those kinds of things. So I think just making sure that you're available, you have a backup team ready to serve that person when they do call, when marketing drives that lead in. I just something yesterday where it said, inquiry leads are up, internet leads are up 37%. We've got to be ready to take those calls and respond quickly. So I think, making sure that when you're spending time with that person on the phone, they feel important and they feel like they're being heard and they're treated in a way that's different from your competitors. I think that's really, really important right now.
Yeah. It costs about $500 to make that phone ring. So, I mean, if you think about every time you pick up that phone, that's a $500 phone call. I think you would take it maybe a little bit more seriously, but it's discouraging to hear that, even now where, we keep hearing from our clients, they are so desperate for leads, like make my phone ring, get me more leads, that still 3 out of 4 times they might get into voicemail or be told that they're in a meeting. And it might take a prospect 3 or 4 attempts to kind of get that conversation.
Well, and keep in mind, we're a shopper, so we're going to call back 4 times. A normal client, a normal prospect is probably not going to do that. They're going to move on to the next community that is available to help them. And, we want these communities to do well, and our hearts truly, truly lie with that salesperson who's trying so hard, and that family and that prospective resident. That's the experience we want to make better. We want to help build the confidence of that salesperson, and it is discouraging to have experiences where that call is not answered or not returned right away, and then when their connection does happen. Not enough interest maybe being shown, really a genuine curiosity in who that person is on the phone, who that prospect is, and knowing that, like you're saying, you're having to almost close a sale virtually. And in a lot of cases. And so, much more discovery needs to be done on the phone and, at least an introduction of potential solutions, to that prospective resident or family member on the phone. And the idea that, we've come up with together a plan for whatever that next step is. I think that we see salespeople and also the pricing discussion on the phone now or during tour. That is kind of cumbersome, and either we're seeing kind of like a lot of feature dumping around pricing, a lot of pricing dumping, and it's necessarily relative to the prospect story or presented in a way that creates any value. So there's some stumbling going on, with that. And so I think, making sure that your teams have a really clear understanding of how do I present pricing over the phone? Because how many years we've been told not to give pricing, don't send it in the brochure, don't do this, And nowadays, I think we have to be much more transparent, but in a way that is meaningful to the prospect.
Right. No, totally agree. And I know that you obviously do a lot of direct shopping. Do you ever have clients though that have you listen to actual recorded calls? As another methodology, whether that's instead of having a shopper because they feel like it's more realistic to listen to real calls?
I'm actually so glad you brought that up because we were just discussing this about last week. We had actually suggested it to a client. They were kind of struggling with pricing on mystery shopping, and they had said, well, our CRM records the calls, so we can kind of listen, but I just don't have time. And I said, well, instead of having us mystery shop, just send us the calls.
Right.
And we'll evaluate them and, and give you feedback on how we thought the call went, and then some recommendations for performance improvement. And they decided they wanted to kind of watch the whole process from inquiry through follow-up. So they decided to go with mystery shopping. But we actually were talking about putting a video out or something on LinkedIn or somewhere and saying, hey, we can do this. This is an easy way for you to, gain insight to how your team is performing and some recommendations for improved performance.
Yeah, I think that would be a wonderful offering to listen to real calls, because I feel like, I haven't seen a lot of data that says, the top 5 questions pre-COVID were these. And since COVID, this is the pivot that we have to make. We have to train our teams differently because now instead of people coming, just trying to figure out, what do you offer? And is it a good fit? And is my mom going to be happy? And are the people there going to be like her? And are the activities things she would enjoy? And can I afford it? And do you have an apartment? It's about, do you have any cases? How many, is your staff vaccinated? What percentage is? Do you have small groups? How are you keeping people safe? I think, and I don't know, I haven't seen any data to say, that prospects are asking, those types of questions. It's been more anecdotal, but I think if you did kind of listen to recorded calls from various providers, I think we would begin to see a pattern that would then inform us about how we need to really update our training to help our teams better, answer those questions.
No, I totally agree. And the same thing, we've just heard kind of stories, from our clients that initially people were asking a lot of questions about COVID and how, like you said, how are they keeping people safe? And my mom's safe in her home by herself. What happens if we move her here? And questions about engagement and, fear about, I'm not going to see my mom for months. So, and we have heard that those questions, it's not happening as often, but the questions are still there. And so we do monitor that. That's actually part of something that we look at is how are those questions being, handled, and how is that team creating, peace of mind and comfort for that family. And on top of that, maybe more importantly, giving them a reason to move during this time, not just sitting back and saying, oh, it's safe, and then you make the decision, but here are several reasons why it's important to move now, and how we can make life better for someone who's living alone,
I was going to ask you that if in your shopping, if you're finding that, the salespeople have gotten kind of proactive in promoting why here, why now, why is it better? Or are they just sitting back hoping that nobody asks the question? Like if I don't bring it up, maybe nobody will think of it.
Very rarely do we hear a salesperson actually bring up COVID. It's sort of like the elephant in the room.
Right.
And most of our shoppers who are, industry professionals, but also folks that fit the profile of, an adult child or an adult influencer are hoping to hear that, some acknowledgement of that elephant in the room. And while many of them, and I think initially we were thinking, oh my gosh, all these companies, our clients are spending so much money shifting gears and changing up their marketing messages and all changes to their digital marketing and all of this and setting all these protocols in place and buying all this PPE, and is all that information connecting with the salesperson, and then are they connecting the dots to be able to deliver that information in a comforting, meaningful way to a prospect? That's how we were first thinking about the COVID message. Yeah. But then after kind of going through a personal situation where my mom had a fall, I mean, it was, a terrible situation, and then having to move from the hospital to rehab to assisted living, and really thinking about the fear that was going on in my mom's head, and kind of sharing with my mom, it's going to be different, Mom, because while you're sitting in your apartment at home and we can't visit, no one visits, it's just you and your phone. Now, if you go into assisted living, even though we might not be able to be there with you, we couldn't be with you in your apartment anyway, but be able to be with you. But now you're going to have nurses visiting and therapists visiting, and the people bringing you your meals. There's going to be constant interaction and connectivity with people, and it's going to be so much better for you to make that move now. And the relief that came over her face was just incredible. So we want to share that, there's a reason to move now, and for many, many people. And I think if our sales teams and our communities can understand kind of what the families are going through and what the prospective resident is going through right now, and that there is this need, they might not even realize it, this need for connectivity, and how that can be as important reason as any to make a move right now. I think it's really important to get that across. And we wish we heard more of salespeople, sharing those kinds of stories and reasons to move.
So how was it being the prospect, not just being the mystery shopper, but having it be real with your mom? And maybe tell us a little bit about that experience, because even with all of your knowledge, when it's your parent or your crisis, it's still a lot to navigate. It's still a big decision, even if you have more knowledge than certainly the average person would have. What kind of impact did that have on you?
Well, I think first and foremost, no matter, 35 years experience in this industry, I became like a 12-year-old kid, basically. Yeah. I mean, thinking about my mom and worrying about her and knowing. And I think it was very, very eye-opening for me, because I feel like I've always been a caring salesperson. And we even say it in our company that our hearts lie with the families and the prospects, but I had no clue. I really did not. My mom fell in her apartment at night alone. She was out her hearing aids. It was a horrific fall. When we got there, the ambulance and the police were there, and they couldn't get in the door, and she had fallen in front of the door. And I mean, it was, and I could just hear her screaming and crying and even wetting herself and getting sick, and no one could help her. I couldn't get to her. And then the ambulance ride to the hospital. And then all of a sudden realizing, oh my God, I got in the ambulance. So now I'm her one person. One person. I have a 6-year-old child. I have a full-time job in a company I'm running, and I'm the only person that can be with her now.
Right.
At 11:30 at night, you're not thinking clearly.
Right. Yeah, of course.
And then just hospital and rehab, and again with assisted living, I think I don't think people really understand the trauma that families go through and how much they need very intentional communication. And, it's like, we're kind of in this world, and it's just sort of common practice to us. It's just things we go through every day, so things we see families go through. And I don't think necessarily community folks realize that difficult, that and it's like, even though I'm knowledgeable and I knew what questions to ask, I just kept thinking, how many families don't, or how many people don't have someone representing them and being their advocate like I was being for my mom.
Yeah.
It broke my heart. And I mean, there were probably, me trying to help. I definitely had conversations with the director of nursing at the hospital and the executive director at the rehab center. And it was not so much to complain. It was just like, this is what your clients, your prospects need, your families need. You've got to do better. You've got to help. And
Yeah.
so, just kind of through that process, try to educate a little bit and be sensitive though to where the communities are and the incredible amount of work that they have to do and what they're facing every day with their, current residents. Mm-hmm. And, try to be mindful of that, but also just try to be helpful, and so I think just being very intentional about your communication and showing some empathy, and
yeah.
Like I said before, some genuine curiosity and understanding that person and that family, they were people before all this happened, so acknowledging that, but then balancing it with the trauma that they've just gone through.
Yeah.
I do think that if maybe not so much now, but because I think there is some pent up demand, but I think prior, thinking about if someone is calling now, they have a need. They've got a reason to call. So
right.
Responsive to that and just really helpful. So
yeah. So good. Certainly, really good points about empathy. I just talked to a VP of sales who unfortunately just lost her mom after a fall, and based on her experience, she's now. She called me to say, "Deb, will you do a class on empathetic selling and listening?" And I'm like, of course. But having that experience and been the prospect herself certainly shifted. And we're actually going to be inviting family members and residents as part of a panel. And yeah, I think it'll be interesting, so I'll be talking about empathetic listening. Then we'll be listening to this panel of people who recently have gone through this transition and this decision. And then we'll get back with the sales team, break them up into small groups and talk to them about what did they hear on the panel? And then how would that impact, that intentional creative follow-up and relationship building.
And I'm so glad to hear you're doing that. We include empathy as one of the criterias on our mystery shop template. So, we're always looking for that. And I mean, this goes back to a very early sales job that I had, working with families in a long-term care facility and being very, very young. I mean, I was college age and someone would ask me, how on earth could somebody your age be able to relate to these families? And, I was always very, very aware of that. And I had several people tell me the reason that you're successful is because of the empathy that you show.
Yeah.
And your genuine concern. So even 30 years back, that was something that was told to me. And I've always just, kind of felt that was important. So I'm so glad to hear you're doing that. That's so awesome.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fun. And empathy is what prospects remember at the end of the day. So let's go back to kind of, and I think a lot of the discovery skills and the lack of empathy kind of comes from, we do this every day, right? So to us, this is, rinse, repeat kind of thing. Pick up the phone. Okay, what's your name, address, phone, zip? How'd you hear about us? What's going on? Why'd you call? Why now? Prescriptions. And it just becomes this kind of checklist, rote and repetitive. And I think a lot of that is driven by expectations on the salesperson. Like you've got to fill in the CRM. So if you're doing discovery to populate your CRM, you're not doing good discovery. The discovery is not for you. The discovery is for the prospect. But I think a lot of that behavior is knowing, I've got my discovery form, I've got my questions I'm supposed to ask, and then I'm going to have to put it into a CRM, and I'm going to get yelled at if I don't have a field, filled in for diagnosis and medication and all that, which at the end of the day isn't why the person called you. So how do you help salespeople really align with kind of, the expectation, on the sales side, sales management side of what they're supposed to do, versus really just being present and empathetic and listening,
Mhm.
because I feel like those things are sometimes working, against each other. And if a salesperson has the choice of one or the other, it's always going to be in alignment with how they're, rewarded, recognized, and
Mhm.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I was listening to a shop recording the other day, and the salesperson failed to get the name of the prospective resident, and it was a very heart-wrenching story. It was the story was that her husband was 68 and he had early onset dementia, and their lives had been turned upside down. And I mean, it was a very convincing story, even to the point we often have shoppers cry because it has some connection to a real story for them.
Sure.
And the salesperson said, "Oh, well, would you mind me asking for your husband's name?" This was very late in the call, so that I can update my CRM.
Oh.
And we just went, we're glad you asked for his name. A little late in the call, and to instead of just saying, because I want to know who he, I want to learn more about his husband, it was to update the CRM. So I think just, making sure that, with one of the things that we really do try to recommend to sales teams is to control what you can control, and kind of always, the low hanging fruit, all of that. But in terms of, the discovery piece of it, really taking control of that call. So we like to talk about a transition statement, that you're kind of doing the rapport building, and then you're going from rapport building into discovery. So you're kind of wrapping up that rapport building. Looks like we're both looking forward to, better weather, and I'm so glad that you reached out to me today. I know you're probably going to have a lot of questions. It would help me to make sure that I'm giving you the right information to be able to maybe ask you a few questions, learn a little bit about what's going on with you and your mom, so that I can make sure I'm sharing, the information to you. And then once we both have our questions answered, we'll spend some time together kind of figuring out what is the best next step for you and your mom. Yeah. And just stating that very early in the conversation, or if this prospect is asking lots of questions, to just take a step back, and be able to share something similar. Gosh, you're asking great questions. I want to make sure that I'm answering them, applicable to your situation. So if you don't mind, let me just ask a few questions myself. Just gaining control, I think, of the call is really, really important. And then being able to kind of ask that first great open-ended question. Now, we every once in a while, or very often, we'll hear a really great open-ended first question, but then there's no connected questions to follow up. The question may be, well, tell me what's going on with your dad. Why you're calling. Well, my dad had a fall in the icy driveway, broke his wrist. It's just been in a lot of pain. And, we're thinking now, it's going to be a struggle for him to be in his home, and so we're thinking we need to look at some different options. How old is your dad? Or,
right.
Or, do you think your dad needs independent living or assisted living? Or, there's no, first, no empathy. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry he fell. How's he doing now? There's no acknowledgement of that. And then on top of that, the connected questions, that are relative to that answer are so important and very often missed. So I think elevating those skills, making sure that from a company standpoint, thinking about what corporations can do to help their teams is invest in their teams, find a program that works well, to help kind of develop some of those skills and, allow them to practice and make sure that you're giving them the tools. And I think also at the same time, building their confidence, so that they feel really comfortable. And, you got to be singing off the same song sheet, right? You can't be hammering them about metrics when, really they need to be hammering about making the connection, following up as promised, and, and all of those things. You don't want there to be a disconnect there, like what you were describing earlier, for sure.
Yeah. I feel like it's hard for salespeople. And I almost feel like with sales, it's kind of Groundhog Day. I mean, I could have had this conversation with you 20 years ago, and we're still talking about answer the phone, return the call, do good discovery, be empathetic. With or without COVID, like all of those things have been, things we've been trying to culturalize for a long time. But a lot of times, it's just how do we get sales teams from the intellectual to the emotional, to be able to say, okay, dad fell. Okay, that's a fact, right? So asking the next questions like, oh, gee, that's awful. Has he fallen before? Is this the first time? Is this a pattern? And,
Right.
how does that make you feel? How is he feeling right now? I mean, it's really hard sometimes. I think it's very intentional, and it takes a lot of training and practice to be able to get underneath that, to go beyond the facts and information and really get to the underlying feelings, because until people get emotional, it's hard to really kind of connect or make them feel the urgency to do something, right?
Well, right. And they're not going to get to that point if you're just asking kind of a checklist of questions. And we do see salespeople asking more questions, but a lot of times the shoppers will get the feeling that it's a checklist, that it's, we had a shop that we did the other day, and it was, the salesperson said, I need to ask you 4 questions. and it was the four good questions, but set up was sort of like, this is what I have been told to do, and so I need to make sure that I do it. It was not natural, and it's really just kind of encouraging our salespeople to be friendly, to be
human,
just have a conversation, just care, just But I think that also is incumbent on the community leadership and the corporate leadership to make sure that they have that freedom to do that, and that they are encouraged to do that, and they're not being hammered with you're not meeting your metrics and that kind of thing, and making sure you're setting goals and expectations that make sense based on this world now, and taking those opportunities to celebrate the wins, even the little micro wins.
Right. Yeah. At this point. Yeah, definitely. So how often are you offered the choice for like a video chat? Because I feel like what we're doing now is much more personal than if I just had you on the phone doing this podcast, or if this podcast didn't have videos and I couldn't see, so you get so much nonverbal information. So are people feeling more comfortable and more confident, and are providers investing, whether it's in, Zoom or GoToMeeting or Teams or Heart Legacy or One Day? Can you talk a little bit about how have we adopted some of these new technologies and new techniques to try to create that more personal interaction?
Early on in COVID, there was certainly a disconnect, or a lot of people were kind of getting things ready and getting their act together. And most often what we saw or what we were offered were pre-recorded virtual tours. Large rooms,
empty, no people,
empty room, gorgeous furniture, gorgeous, touches all over the place, but nobody in the buildings. And I would say the majority of the links we received were just exactly that. Then it kind of did, when people started to get a little bit more comfortable, then we would start to see a pre-recorded tour that was done for the prospect. And even though it was done specifically for the prospect, it really wasn't done specifically for the prospect. There was not a lot of acknowledgement about what the conversation had been. And sometimes you would see, a lot of jumbled, shaking. And we had one where the person didn't say anything. The whole time we were walking down the hall, and all you could hear is the corduroy on her jeans going the whole time. It was just so, like, there was just so, and the community, of course, was gorgeous, but it was just like so much missing, so many missed opportunities. starting to see people feel, I think, a little bit more comfortable and having that, like conversation like we're having right now.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very, very rare that we're offered that. And I think it's almost like their guards come down a little bit, almost maybe a little bit too much. And so we're seeing messy desks and, a lot of the same things you'd see on a walk-in or an in-person tour, signs posted on a wall, or, like I said, the messy office, or, those kinds of things. We had a great one recently where the salesperson just it was new to her, and she shared that it was new, but you could see the effort that she was making, and she did amazing introductions to staff and residents that were out and about, and it just made it feel so much more personal for that shopper. And it was live. I mean, it was happening live, and the sales process may not have been handled perfectly, but the personal connections that were there made it seem like it was, and no one other competitors had offered it. So they stood out. They out on their competitors in that market with a very, kind of easy 30-minute, walkabout tour. So, and probably where we we get a little bit disappointed is with, like the Heart Legacy and the One Day. They do these, you can do these cute little 3-4 minute videos. Yeah. And we all the time are telling clients, use that to your advantage. Use that as part of your follow-up. That's the follow-up. We talk about scheduled and agreed upon next steps, but that gap in between, they still need to build that connection and those relationships. Fill those gaps with, give permission to text. Who do you text with? You text with your friends and family. That elevates your relationship. But as far as the video goes, if they have a concern about food, or if they have a concern about mom being isolated, make sure you're in that video, you're introducing the activity director. And all that person needs to say is, Mary told me that, you love to craft and you haven't been able to do that. And I want to make sure that even though we may not be holding craft classes right now, I have like a storage, things, and I want to show you that on the video, and get their juices flowing, and give them, help that prospect begin to connect the dots that you can solve those problems. And video is a perfect way to do that. Even if it's not live, it's something pre-recorded. It could still be really personal. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really this is all about a balance between high tech and high humanity, and replacing all of those face-to-face interpersonal interactions with video and other kind of creative follow-up. And it's amazing. I'll bet when you go back to the operator and say, gosh, we got a follow-up email, or we didn't get any follow-up, but they probably had sales mail, right? They probably had the technology in hand to send your shopper something that was more personal based on their interaction. But instead,
we'll make the recommendation to invest in a product like that, and they'll say, we have it. And we're like, sorry.
I know.
Might be a good idea to put it to use.
Yes.
So, and One Day probably has this. I know we did happen to look at Heart Legacies. They've got sample videos right on their sites that give you ideas about how to use the product, and they're extremely helpful with their tips, and things they send out. So, gosh, take advantage of it for sure.
Yeah. And it also, you get notified when somebody watches your video. So then who's most engaged with you, because they're the ones that are watching it. And I know on the marketing side, if we put a personalized video in an email, we have our open rates go up by 26%. So, definitely valuable. So as we're coming out of COVID, and people are celebrating, their residents are vaccinated, they're being able to kind of make that, statement that it's safe to move in, and there is hopefully this pent up demand. Do you have any recommendations about occupancy recovery and sales interactions and kind of best practices that we should be focusing on? Because I feel like some of this, we've changed forever how we can interact now. When we can get back to in person, that's going to be wonderful. And people are going to be thrilled to be able to do on-site events and tours and luncheons and all of those things. Although I think we're not there yet. We may get through 2021 before everyone really feels comfortable, but we probably are forever going to have this hybrid model where people are going to know that they have a choice. And, can't you just show me around? And I'm sure you must have, we could do a Zoom conference and I don't have to come in. So in some way, we've almost conditioned people that they should have choice, and we're going to have this hybrid model. So how does that influence or impact sales training and what you recommend as we're coming out of this and really looking to recover strong right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know that there's any, cutting edge, as far as I'm concerned, any kind of cutting edge thing to do. I really do believe it is just continuously paying attention to the basics and paying attention to that prospect, valuing, like you said, if it, costs $500 to make the phone ring. So that's, maybe that's a place to start. Okay. This is expensive. But then just, valuing that individual as a human being, as a person, and, making sure we believe very strongly in a team approach to growing occupancy. It is not all on that salesperson, making sure that the executive directors of the communities understand their role as in terms of driving sales and getting that whole team on board. I think that is really, really important. And, as people do start to come back into the buildings, or if you're doing a virtual tour, those introductions and the again, helping that prospective resident or family member begin to connect the dots about living in that community. You can't expect them to know or to understand where the value comes from. So making sure that is presented, in the most meaningful way. And I think, it kind of just goes down the line, the inquiry call and preparing for that visit and creating a visit that is just very memorable and makes great use of their time and outshines every competitor. There's not much that you need to do to outshine your competitor, I promise you. We've been in probably 700 communities. And we can count on one hand the number of times we've been introduced to an executive director.
Wow.
And so those kinds of very, very simple things, get the basics right first would be my advice. I mean, just get it right. And if you've got goals, meet your goals. I mean, I'm definitely, a proponent of making phone calls and, using your CRM to help guide you and remind you about what's happening with that person. And, I think it's really not rocket science. It's really not. I mean, and I don't mean to be flippant about that. It is really, really just basic. It's caring about people. You're in this industry. It's a caring, high touch industry. And it has become more high tech, I guess, recently. But there are sort of old world, techniques that work in the new world. You just got to adjust them a little bit. Probably one tip I would give is making sure that your online presence is sending the right message. And that, again, you're kind of able to connect the dots there, looking at your website and making sure all the functions work and all of that. Presenting your story in a poignant and meaningful way, then making sure that your Facebook, that the two connect. That what they're seeing on the website is reflective of and similar to what they're seeing on Facebook, and really using, Facebook as a way to continue to deliver that message, and maybe even in a more poignant way, because you're showing kind of what you're doing and how you're connecting with residents and that sort of thing. And a lot of times be a disconnect there. So,
yeah, I was going to ask you, I think that's a great place for us to kind of finish up our conversation is, do you kind of start your mystery shop or as part of your mystery shop evaluating kind of the quality of the website, how easy it is to navigate? Is there a place for you to, to convert or looking at their, social channels? And I just also wonder if you've found that you have folks that want you to do a mystery shop based on an internet lead to find out, are the sales team treating an internet lead differently than somebody who calls in? Because I know from a marketing perspective, we sometimes feel that there's a different perception about internet leads and web leads than, there's like 3 buckets of leads, right? There's the third party leads, which everybody feels like is probably the highest volume, but the lowest quality. Then you kind of get the web leads, and then you end up with, the referrals and people that are actually calling in, which are kind of like the gold, those are your golden leads. Do you find that you get a different, that you're treated differently as initiating on the website or through a third party than you do when you just call into the community?
So we can do the mystery shop a couple of different ways. We can call the community directly and work through that, navigate that process, or we can inquire online. It really depends on what the customer asks us to do, or our client asks us to do, or we've even gone through a place for mom. Maybe leads are down with a place for mom, and so they want to know, who's a place for mom recommending as options in the market, or what is a place for mom saying about the community. So we've even done the inquiries that way, or maybe a client is saying, we've got seems like we're not converting the place for mom leads, or we're having difficulty when they're setting up the tours. So that might be a reason to go through a place for mom. When we go through the website, a lot of times we end up going through the website because we can't get a hold of anybody on the phone.
Yeah.
So, and now again, we're under time constraints, because we're trying to get the work done by a particular date that has been and agreed to, with the client. So we may need to move it along. So we would go through the website to try to get to that salesperson, in another way. And I don't know that there's necessarily a huge difference in the quality of maybe the timing of the response. We'd love to see more kind of that speed to lead mentality for sure, on both types of inquiries. But I think that generally we're maybe a little disappointed in the response through a website, and that it's kind of generic. Which of course it needs to be somewhat generic, but it feels like that generic response should be followed up very quickly with a phone call or something like that. And usually there's some gap in time there. It's not maybe happening as quickly as we think it should. So it's interesting. It's a little, and we'd like to do more web shops, because we think would be very valuable to companies. We don't get requests to do those that often. So we think it would be something that would be very helpful to the client.
I would agree. So if people want to get more information about you and mystery shop and sales coaching and recruitment, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Well, they can certainly go on our website, which is just seniorsourceconsulting.com, or they can actually reach out to me. We put my cell phone number kind of on everything we do. And so my cell is 615-330-9553. Or they could just email me at amy@seniorsourceconsulting.com. Pretty easy. I think we're very responsive. We get, I will say we do a pretty good job of answering our web inquiries.
Oh, good.
I get an email from Libby that says, our favorite kind of email.
Yeah, exactly. You got to love that organic search.
and then I respond as quickly as I can. So we try to walk the walk. Is that what you say?
Yes. Yeah.
But no, so people can reach out to me directly for sure. And
Okay.
we did want to share that we have a program called the Art of Discovery. Probably discovery is the piece we see missing the most on an inquiry.
Yeah.
That really good genuine discovery effort. So we do have a program called the Art of Discovery, and I was speaking with Libby, and any of your listeners, if they mention this podcast, then we would be happy to offer up a 4-week program. It's do kind of 3 weeks, 1 week free, and the 4-week is the 4th week is really that opportunity for that sales team to connect the dots. With the idea of doing great discovery, why it's important, but it's that opportunity to really practice it. So the 4th week is really important, and that's one of the reasons why we felt like, well, maybe that's what we should be offering. It's a 90-minute Zoom call once a week for 4 weeks, and we can have 3 or 4 of your team members on the call. And it really does give them great insight about why it is so important and how discovery sort of connects through the entire sales process. If you don't do discovery, you're really not building a great relationship and great trust and showing interest. You're not able to really match your services and your solutions to that prospect to create value. And your follow-up is kind of lacking, because you can't do great follow-up if you don't know enough about the prospect. So it really is important, and we've been really happy to see our clients taking advantage of the program. It's affordable and it's easy to do, and so I hope maybe some folks will give it a try.
Great. Yeah. Well, reach out and mention Senior Living Marketing Perspectives, and you'll get this wonderful offer from Amy. So we appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll get to see you when we're back doing conferences. And we appreciate you sharing your senior living marketing perspectives with us today.
Thank you so much. It was very nice to be here. I really appreciate you and all that you're doing to help the industry.
All righty. Thanks so much, Amy.